here's what I want you to hear. You are not behind. You're not missing something magical, and you don't need to buy your way into confidence. Start where you are. Upgrade when it makes sense, and trust that your needs will become clearer with time. Welcome to the Quilt Scouts podcast. I'm Megan, your Quilt Scout leader and fellow adventurous quilter. This is a cozy campfire chat for quilters who crave creativity, community, and a gentle nudge to try something new. Each week, we'll talk about quilting and the small adventures that help us grow more confident, one stitch at a time. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. Today's episode is one I have wanted to record for a while because I get questions about tools pretty often. Questions like, what do I need? What should I buy first? What was a waste of money? And how do I know if a tool is actually worth it? So instead of doing product demos, which doesn't translate super well to podcast audio anyway, I want to talk about quilting tools through the lens of real experience. And this is just my experience. So I'm going to talk about what actually helped me, what I bought too soon, what I thought I needed but didn't, and how I decide now whether a tool has earned its place in my sewing room. So this isn't a shopping list. It's more like trail notes from someone who's already hiked the path. So let's start with tools I'm genuinely glad I bought early on. Even if looking back, I might choose slightly different versions now. When I first wanted to try quilting, I bought a Fiskars starter set. It included a 45mm stick rotary cutter, an 18 by 24 inch cutting mat, and a 24 by 6 inch ruler. I also happened to pick up a 6 inch square OmniGrid ruler. So that set was, one, it was budget friendly. It was easy to find. I'm pretty sure I bought it off of Amazon. And this part really matters. It fit in my life at the time. So when I first started quilting, I didn't have a sewing room. I was cutting fabric on my kitchen table. I was sewing at my kitchen table. So when I was done, everything had to be packed up and put away. So that smaller cutting mat was easy to store. The ruler, it did its job. The rotary cutter, it cut fabric. That was enough. It was enough to let me test the waters when it came to quilting, figure out if it's something that I wanted to commit to long term. It was low risk. And that starter set is something that I would recommend that to someone that wants to try quilting and see if it's a right fit for them before you start investing into other tools. So reminder, your tools don't have to be your forever tools. They just have to help you start. As I kept quilting though, my preferences changed. Not because what I did anything wrong or what I purchased was wrong, but because I learned what actually mattered to me. That might be different for you. So for example, rotary cutters. I still use a 45mm rotary cutter for most of my cutting, but now I strongly prefer my Olfa ergonomic cutter. It's more comfortable in my hand, the blade stays sharper longer, and I love the safety features that it comes with. The blade only retracts when I squeeze the handle, so that's especially useful for me when I'm tired or distracted or I've got a little boy like hanging out with me in my sewing room. The same thing happened with rulers. So I still use a 24-inch ruler all the time, especially for cutting with the fabric strips from yardage. But I switched from my Fiskars ruler to a Creative Grids ruler. So if you're not familiar with Creative Grids rulers, they have these little non-slip grips on the back that make such a huge difference. I noticed early on that I was making a lot of cutting mistakes just because my ruler kept slipping while I was cutting. So upgrading my ruler to the Creative Grids one was definitely a smart move as far as just safety and accuracy and not wasting fabric. Highly recommend. So my cutting mats have followed a similar path. Like I said, I started with an 18-inch by 24-inch mat. It was perfect for when I didn't have a sewing room. Now that I do have a designated space for sewing, I much prefer a larger cutting mat. Right now I have a 24-inch by 36-inch mat. It gives me more space to work. I have to shift fabric around much less. And it just gives me room to breathe and to work. So same task, different season of life. I also bought fairly early on a 6-inch by 12-inch ruler. And let me tell you, that is a workhorse in my sewing room. I use that ruler all of the time. That size is just endlessly useful for trimming blocks, squaring things up, making quick cuts. Another tool I don't regret is the Stripology XL ruler. Now, I don't use it constantly, but when a quilt pattern requires a lot of width of fabric strips, it is a huge time saver. This is one of those tools where you don't need it every day, but when you do need it, you're very glad that you have it. So I have zero regrets on that one. And finally, my first sewing machine. So I started quilting on a very old Kenmore sewing machine that I had had since I was a kid. Was it fancy? No. Did it do the job? Absolutely. That machine taught me you do not need a dream setup to start quilting. You just need something that works. Now, while those tools help me get started, there are definitely things I bought early that I wish I'd chosen differently. So let's talk about the glow ups. This section is less about regret and more about learning curves. First, thread. When I started quilting, I used whatever thread I had on hand. I couldn't even tell you what it was. I had so many issues: thread breaking, tension problems, quilting issues on my very first quilt. It broke my heart to see all of the quilting I'd worked so hard on to start breaking and coming out. It wasn't until later that I switched to Aurifil thread, and game changer. I mean, it's a high quality, strong, smooth, comes in beautiful colors, and it works. The 50 weight cotton thread is my favorite go-to. If I could go back, this is one of the first upgrades I would probably make. Good thread doesn't make you a better quilter, but it does make quilting much less frustrating. Another tool I wish I had bought sooner was the Block Lock half square triangle ruler. Okay, that's a mouthful. If you trim a lot of half square triangles, especially stacks of them, this thing is a lifesaver. It works by locking into the seam of the HST, and it makes trimming faster and more accurate. I feel like I fought this tool for way too long, and I definitely should have bought it sooner. Same goes for the quilter's clapper. Here's the thing. It looks boring. It feels old school, and it works incredibly well, especially for stubborn seams, bulky fabric, FPP. It's one of those tools you don't realize you need until you try it. Also, I want to talk about pressing tools. So I started with a regular iron and a regular ironing board, which was totally fine. Then I added a 12-inch wool pressing mat, which I loved. Once I had more space, I upgraded to a larger wool pressing mat, and I much prefer that now. When my iron eventually broke, I upgraded to the Oliso Smart Iron, and then I later added the Oliso Mini Project Iron. And surprise, surprise, I actually prefer the Mini. So the combination between the Mini iron and the larger wool pressing mat that can live right next to my sewing machine makes things much easier for me when I'm working. I love being able to use it right next to my machine without getting up constantly. And then finally, my sewing machine upgrade. So I want to talk about this. And about 2 years into quilting, once I knew that this wasn't a passing hobby, I invested in a Bernina 535, and I love it. That upgrade, however, came after I knew what I wanted and what I needed, and that timing is important, right? So those are tools that I genuinely wish that I'd had sooner. Some tools fall into a different category entirely. Before we keep going, I want to pause for just a quick second, especially since we've been talking so much about time, energy, and, let's be honest, decision fatigue. One thing that genuinely helps me during busy seasons is HelloFresh. When my days are full, quilting, work, family life, the last thing that I want to do is stand in the kitchen wondering what's for dinner. HelloFresh takes that decision off my plate. The meals are simple, flexible, and realistic for real-life schedules. And right now, if you use the link in the show notes, you can get your first HelloFresh box free. It's an easy way to take one thing off your mental load and save your energy for the things you actually want to be doing. No pressure, just something that's been genuinely helpful for me. All right, let's jump back in. Let's talk about tools that aren't bad, but weren't necessary, at least not for me. First, I would say is the Flying Geese specialty rulers. Are they helpful? Yes. Necessary? Not really. I don't reach for mine very often. I think that I reach for my half square triangle ruler much more often than I reach for my Flying Geese specialty ruler. Same story goes for the 12.5-inch by 12.5-inch ruler I bought specifically for a t-shirt quilt. And while it worked, I rarely use it now. And honestly, I probably could have made that quilt without it. That doesn't mean it was a bad purchase. It just wasn't essential in the long term. So for foundation paper piecing, I bought a light box. Again, in theory, great. In reality, it's kind of a pain to pull out. I have a perfectly good window with natural light, and I tend to use that instead of having to pull the light box every time I want to do foundation paper piecing. I also own a 60mm rotary cutter that I almost never use. So this is an example of bigger doesn't always mean better. It really depends on what you're cutting and what feels comfortable to you. So for me, the 60mm rotary cutter does not get used. I have also purchased 2 rotating cutting mats, one from Olfa and one from Sue Daily Designs. The Olfa one doesn't rotate well at all. The Sue Daily one spins beautifully. It's on ball bearings and rotates like a dream. And yet I rarely reach for either of them, not because they're bad tools, but just like with the light box, pulling them out adds another step. It adds friction. And if that's the case, I'm probably not going to use it. So again, these tools aren't bad tools. They're just reminders that not every tool earns a permanent place in your sewing space. Some tools fall somewhere in the middle. Not everyday tools, but absolutely worth it if you do a specific technique. So these are more niche, technique-specific tools. For myself, when I'm doing foundation paper piecing, I do love my add a quarter ruler, and that one has definitely earned its keep. I also own a 28mm Olfa rotary cutter. Again, I don't use it often, but when I'm cutting tight curves or templates, it's really handy. These are tools that don't need to be in every beginner kit, but they are great when the moment calls for them. If I had to pick one tool that truly made quilting feel easier, not better or perfect, but just easier, that would be my walking foot with a seam guide. Being able to quilt a simple grid without marking every line for me is huge. Because one, I don't enjoy quilting to begin with. It's something that I do out of necessity when I have a smaller project that needs to be quilted, and my go-to is a diagonal grid. So having a walking foot with a seam guide, it reduces mental load, it reduces physical strain. It just makes finishing quilts feel a little easier and more approachable for me. And this wasn't about perfection, but it's just about feeling more confident, about being able to jump in and knock out an easy quilting project. So let's talk about how I decide if a tool is worth buying now. This is the part I really want you to take with you. Now, before I bring something new into my sewing room, I run it through a pretty simple filter. First, can I actually afford it right now? Not just could I technically buy it, but would buying it create stress later? Because no tool is worth feeling anxious about every time you look at it. Second, do I honestly think I'll use this repeatedly? Not this would be cool to have, but will I reach for this again and again? Third, will this make quilting easier for me? Will it save time? Will it save energy? Will it reduce pain, strain, or frustration? If a tool doesn't make quilting feel better in my body or in my brain, it's usually not worth it. I also ask myself, do I already own something that can do this job? Maybe not perfectly, but well enough. And finally, very practically, do I actually have space to store it? Where's it going to live? Will it be easy to grab, or is it going to end up buried in a closet? So by asking yourself these questions, you're going to save yourself money, space, and honestly, some guilt. Because buying tools doesn't make you a more serious quilter. Using the tools you already have in ways that support you, that's what actually moves you forward. So if you are early in your quilting journey, here's what I want you to hear. You are not behind. You're not missing something magical, and you don't need to buy your way into confidence. Start where you are. Upgrade when it makes sense, and trust that your needs will become clearer with time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love for you to follow or subscribe to the Quilt Scouts podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if you have a minute, leaving a review is one of the best ways to help this podcast find other quilters who could use a little creativity and community too. You can find show notes and more from Quilt Scouts at quiltscouts.com. Until next time, happy Trail Scout.